So far we've been graphing more basic sine and cosine functions. Now we're actually going to shift the cosine and sine functions up and down and left and right. And when we go side to side, it's called a phase shift. So if you look right here, when you're talking in terms of x, if you see x minus or x plus a number, the h is the phase shift. So if h is a positive number, it's going to be x minus. So if it's going right, you're going to subtract, and if you're going left, you're going to add. Whereas the k, just if you're going up, this number is going to be positive, and if you're going down, the constant outside is going to be negative. So find an image. So image means after you shift, sine of x under xy, x minus pi over 4, y plus 2. So you're going left pi over 4 and up 2. So how to write this is we're going to do y equals sine, and now I'm going left pi over 4. So this means I'm going to write x plus pi over 4, and then I'm going up 2, so this is plus 2. Number 2, find the image of y equals cosine of x when I'm going left pi over 3, so it's y equals cosine. So cosine of x plus pi over 3, and then I'm subtracting 4. And then number 3, write a function whose parent function is y equals sine of x, and it has a phase shift of negative pi over 4 and a vertical shift of negative 2. So y equals sine of x plus pi over 4, because we're going left pi over 4 and then down 2. Okay, now to graph it. Graph y equals cosine of pi over 6 minus 1. So this means that we're going to shift the cosine function left pi over 6 units, and then we're going to move it down 1. The amplitude of the function is still 1, but we're moving it down 1. So I kind of set up my graph vertically up and down. So if I know it's shifted down 1, we're going up by 5s or 1s here. If I know if it shifted down 1, I'm going to go, my cosine function is going to be between here and here. The amplitude of this function is still 1. It's just started out and shifted down -1. So usually the cosine function starts at 0, 1, but now I've been shifted over to the left pi over 6. So let's look at what this looks like. Usually I would start right here, but I went left pi over 6. So I'm going to mark this pi over 2 right here. So I'm going to start my function right here at negative pi over 6. Right at that point. It's not even the best right here, because this would be pi over 4. So I'm going to start it closer to here. Okay, so my function, remember the period of the cosine function, this period hasn't changed at all. So this period is still 2 pi. So if I start at negative pi over 6, I'm going to end at negative 2 pi minus pi over 6. So this kind of been pushed over too. So in between here, my function for a cosine needs to start, go down, up, and make like a W, like this. Or make not a W, but a U that's kind of spread out. That's what a cosine function looks like. So this part right here becomes my new, almost like x-axis. So this is going to help me get my minimum and my intercepts. So halfway in between this is where it hits the minimum value. So it's going to hit the minimum about right here. And in between those two parts is where it's going to have the intercepts. So my function ends up looking like this. Excuse me. So if I want to keep this going over here, I'm going to back up to where if I started at negative pi over 6 right here, then this is going to be a little less than 2 pi, and I'm going to do the same thing, and this is going to be a little less than pi, and this is going to be in between here where it hits and then over here where it hits. So if I can keep my curve going. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and then you can see the whole graph. So it helps me if I mark off the top and the bottom of the graph. If I mark off where I start and then I add 2 pi, or I add the period, so you have to think about what the period is. And then within that, what I do is I mark the period in 4 sections, and I connect the dots with those sections. So I'm going to do this next one too. Graph 2 cycles of y equals sine of x plus pi over 2 minus 3. So first I know that this is going left pi over 2. So my cycle is going to start left pi over 2, and then it's going to go down 3. And my amplitude is still just 1. So over here, if I move down the sine function that starts at 0, if I move it down 3 units, it's going to start right here. And the amplitude's still 1, so I'm going to hold it in between here and here. And then this blue line is going to kind of be my new x-axis. So sine usually starts, or it's the sine function, just y equals sine of x, the parent function, has a y value 0. That's why it starts at 0 right here. But this time I'm going left pi over 2. So I have to start my function back here. But my period is still 2 pi. So that means the next spot is going to be 4 units over, and the other spot is going to be 4 units back, like this. So once I set up one cycle, I break my cycle into 4 chunks. Well, this is really nice because it's going up by, I do have 4 chunks right here. So if you remember a sine function, the sine starts at 0 and it goes max, intercept, min, intercept. Max, intercept, min. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to connect the dots and make a curve. Oops, I got to continue over here. So min, intercept, max, intercept. So that's how it's been shifted. So this time we have a cosine function, and this time we don't have it moving up or down, but we do have it moving right pi over 4. So this too, remember, affects the period. So this means that there's 2 cycles within pi over 2, or it's within 2 pi. So this means that the period is pi. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right pi over 4. So if I move it right pi over 4, pi over 4 is right here. And my cycle is now, my period is now pi. So this means that right here, between these 2 points, I'm going to have a cycle. Between here and here, I'm going to have a cycle. because this is going up by pi. This is going up by pi. This is going up by pi. This is going up by pi, pi, pi. So between this, if this is my period right here, you can break your period up into 4 parts. So there's going to be, remember cosine starts at a maximum, so this is going from 1. Let's check back. Is the amplitude 1? Yes, the amplitude's 1, because there wasn't a number in front of cosine over here. Right here. So the amplitude's 1. So I'm still squeezing it between here and here. Oh, not there. Oops. Okay, so I'm still squeezing it between here and here. So, but within this one cycle, right here, if I break up this one cycle right here, I'm going to start at the max, right here, because cosine, remember cosine of 0 is 1, and then I'm going to have the minimum exactly halfway in between, and then the maximum is going to be back here. So right here are going to be where my intercepts are. So I did one whole cycle in this pi amount from here. And then I'm going to continue it over here. So this will be my intercept. This will be my max. This will be my intercept. This will be my max. So I keep the cycle going. I move it over to the right. This cycle from here to here, if you think about halfway, down here it's going to be at the minimum. So max, intercept, min, max. Let's zoom out so you can see the curve going. So 0, write in my minimum values, minimum values, minimum values. So I go my maximum are above these dots here. So this, 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 this. So that's how you can do the phase shift. So first, move it right or left, then figure out your period and break off the period into 4 spots, remembering that your cosine starts up like this, and then your sine starts in the middle and makes an S. Okay, then down here, just a couple more. Write an equation for what's going on for this cosine function. So what I'm noticing is the amplitude is still 1, and I'm noticing it's down 1. And I'm also noticing that the period is still 2 pi. But remember, cosine starts at 1, and so we're starting up pi over 2 over. So really, this looks like a sine function, but we're writing it in terms of cosine. So we are just shifting it over to the right, pi over 2. So this is going to be y equals, remember the amplitude's still 1 and the period's still 2 pi, so that's not going to change. So it's cosine of x, we're going right, pi over 2, and then we shifted it down 1.